Good evening. It is Wednesday evening, September 4th, 2024. It is now 6:16, and we will open this meeting of the CDAC. We will start with a roll call. May we begin with Ms. Hogan?
Thank you. Deborah Hogan, mayoral appointee.
John Brunza, mayoral appointee.
Rebecca Rathmel, second district appointee.
Mary Ann Callahan, mayoral appointee.
Eileen Hughes, District 2.
Michelle O'Loughlin, Council at Large.
Marilyn Austin, 6th District. Jordan Trice, 5th District.
Turn it.
Rebecca Porter, 1st District.
Thank you. The first item on the agenda, and you will notice that they both say, both printouts you got says August 22nd. The one that says voting item is the one we're working off of today. Voting item in parentheses. We want to look at the uniform pages that we created, I think a couple of years ago now. And I think it was last year, it might have been the year before, but we had a discussion of making these a little more specific and explanatory for the people that get them, because what we've been finding is that people have not been using them as consistently as we would like to. So does anyone have any input about what these sheets actually look like? And if anybody is a little unclear as to what their purpose was, we wanted something that would be a one-pager that would get to the crux of the issues that we usually ask people about. It's sort of a way for them to expedite their presentation with us. We've used it for, or we intended to use it for agencies that apply to us, the stakeholders that we invite in that are not applying to us, and then the other form is for the city departments that present to us. So I have thought that in the first, after the title on the page, we should have a short explanation. I think the one form, Housing and Administration, that says HUD, it has a brief, I'm looking at the wrong thing. One of them has a brief explanation, but I think we can be a little more specific about this. And then when it comes time for these agencies to present, or somewhere in the application forms, we mentioned that this is it's a useful tool. It helps us as we ask people questions, and it also helps the agencies to formulate their answers, the ones that really matter to us. It's just a baseline to begin with. We can go obviously further in our questioning, but it kind of standardizes what we want from each agency. Any thoughts, Deb?
Yes, I took a look at this over the weekend, and one of the things going back to Parks and Rec, when we were asking, for example, the previous funding items, what I loved is how they attached their budget so that we could take a look at the different project years and what was accomplished. I thought that was a very good utilization of that. So maybe if there is a sample, we could refer to that. Now, when it came to the DPW, and maybe this is just stylistic, they answered in blue, which made it easy for the eye to take a look at what their answers were.
You're working off the uniform interview page.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, I just want to
I
clarify
apologize.
for everyone else. That's all.
I do apologize.
No, please don't. But that's what you're referring to, item B, describe previous CDBG funding usages. Is that what you're
Right.
talking
I was
about?
just trying to showcase a good utilization so that for new members for Cdac or anybody looking at it, it was just, oh, you did this at this park. I think that would be applicable for almost every department that comes before us. I just chose to highlight Parks and Rec because they did such a nice job of including things. They went so far as to include a few pictures of their product bonus, but not necessarily required. And just one of the things for me that's important is D is define the areas or population so that if each one of us around this table has our own viewpoints and things that are passionate for us, it allows us to hone in on that. And if we have any further questions beyond what is identified here, it helps us formulate our questions for the next meeting. Those are just some ideas.
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, and we will make a note that our chairperson has shown up, I'll just finish off this thought and hand the meeting over to the chairperson. Would you like to, for attendance?
For attendance purposes, Justin McGregor, District 7 Chair. Thank you.
You're saying that on that form, you would like them to actually attach a budget sheet? Is that what you're saying?
What they had utilized in past, I really like that so that we can get an idea of what they have included, because not some of us old timers do have a recollection of what they've done in the past, but it's just a nice comparison. I don't know if how many cycles we want to go back, but I just thought that was a good representation and just trying to give an example of
So
something that
I
was
guess
positive.
I'm still a little unclear. You're saying that you would like them to provide a separate document added to this one?
Yes, that was more specific.
Okay, could we make that in parentheses if you'd like to do that? Because it may be something that, a lot of them wouldn't want to go back and look at their because we're talking about previous funding. We're not talking about what they're applying for now.
Would they be able to do it for the single previous year? Because
I think so, at
That's-
least.
that feels
Be-
helpful.
So maybe we should expand the question, and maybe what we should do is give the option of attaching whatever additional information they would like to talk about. Because many people, if they're going to do this, maybe they just want to go through and fill in these blanks on the soft copy that we send. So could we expand that question and then say, if possible, could you include? So let's talk about how many cycles we want to go back.
I would, I think I agree with Deb. I don't know that it makes as much sense to make it optional because I'm not sure people will do it if it's optional. But if they can provide their previous department budget, just the previous year, in that same sheet format that we take a look at, because looking at the city budget, unless you know the intricacies of each, it's difficult to follow. And if we're making decisions that will fund their department, I feel like having just one pager in front of us.
If they can provide that, if they
Well,
have that.
I don't think that's an
So
unreasonable
they would isolate
expectation.
that page of their budget. But here's the problem, at least as I see it, what we want them to just do is describe the program that would be listed in any budget. I mean, what did it do? What did you do with it? Do you understand? I mean, this is it's supposed to be sort of a narrative.
Oh,
to
this
give
is
us-
for all of I was thinking just the departments within the city of Binghamton.
But
So-
even the departments, sometimes, parks could say, we use this part of the budget for X, the park rangers, for example. But if someone doesn't know what the park rangers are doing or what impact not having the park rangers in the program, the budget sheet doesn't really tell them that. So I'm thinking we need probably both a narrative and then so that the statistics person and the narrative person can both be happy. Does that sound like something we can do?
So I just want to clarify, the uniform interview page is for city departments.
Right.
That's pretty much the only thing. To fill out. You were talking about department budgets and Deb was talking about CDBG funding, which are two separate things because the department budget is available from the city website. I can provide those, or you can even go out and look on your own. So I think you want to make sure you're not, adding extraneous work unless you feel like it needs to be in there and clarified. And because department budgets can get very big and the CD funding is not visible outside of the CDBG budget. So if you go to the actual plan budget, you'll go to parks and you'll not see any CDBG funding in there. Because the way it works, so for example, park rangers, that might be under parks, but it's going to be under like a H or an A line, well, it'd be an A line salary expense. We reimburse parks from CDBG, which is seen on the CDBG budget. So if you just go to the CDB, you'll see it there, but it won't be, it's not listed separately under parks. It's
That
only
makes
listed in
sense.
CDBG.
So narrative and CDBG program budget.
Or we could say within the context of this question that they provide, even if it's not a sheet, a spreadsheet, or we could say, please tell us what we gave you, what you used it for, what percentage of your budget is that? So we can even, be a little more specific here without asking them to go through and do what Steve just did. If Steve, so maybe what we need to do is work on a more detailed question as opposed to what we've got there now.
I really like the what percentage of your overall
Yeah,
budget is CDBG.
Yeah, and
That's helpful.
and how it impacted what you were able to do. I think that's important too.
Yep.
In other words, what would you do without it? How would it affect you if you didn't get it, kind of thing? So we can, maybe that's something that everybody could work on. We don't have to vote on this necessarily tonight, do we, Steve?
Yes,
Yes?
yes.
But can we vote that we are going to expand this question? Would that be a viable?
Yeah, I mean, you'll approve the form. I mean, you'll approve the page. form
Okay,
that
but
you're-
we will say that we'll approve it with the caveat that we're going to expand that question.
No, you would tell me what you want to update the form to be, and then you would.
Oh, you
approve
want to
that
do it
change.
now?
Yeah, you
Okay.
can do it now, yeah.
Okay. He wants to do it now, and now I hand over to Justin. It's your baby.
Well, I wouldn't vote on individual questions unless you feel like you should vote on individual questions. You can vote on the overall page as well.
If you're saying that we have to have that expanded question B and vote on it tonight, then that's what we need to do right now. So how do we word this new?
Are you talking
I
about the
think what
voting
you
or just the
just
wording?
said-
I'm talking about
the
the wording.
wording.
I'm
Oh, okay,
talking
okay,
about
okay.
B.
I
What?
think what you just said, oh, go ahead, Justin. Well, what you just said, I think you asked, provide a brief description of what the CDBG funding was used for. What percentage of your overall budget was funded via CDBG dollars, and something about what's the impact, what wouldn't you be able to do?
So maybe we could do bullet points under B that list those items that
This
you've
is
just.
B, right?
Yeah.
I know I came late to the game,
Here.
but
Well, it's kind of dipping into A2. I
It's-
wrote
yeah.
down what percentage of overall budget is CDBG and how would the lack of funding and how would the lack of CDBG funding impact your department?
Do we want to also be specific as to what previous, are we talking about last year, the year?
Yeah, and that's the
previous?
other thing. How far back do you want
Yeah.
to say for previous
So
years?
if we make those changes, is
Yeah.
everybody happy with that form?
How many years back do you want to go?
I'm sorry?
How many years back?
I thought we
I
agreed
only
about
need
one.
one.
Yeah.
Just one? So
do we
last,
want to say one or do we want to say last budget with CDBG
Well, the last
funds?
fiscal, the last funding year.
But what
last-
if it's not an agency that had funds the
This
previous
is the
year from us?
these are city
Oh,
departments.
this is department?
Yeah, these are city departments.
Okay.
technically, it would have to be the last full fiscal year. So
let's do
since
that.
you're working on 51 now, please don't start messing up. We're going into 50. So it means that city departments would only have 49, which just ended the end of August to be able to talk about.
But we could say for your previous funding year and then whatever that applies to, that would work. Because
Previous
this whole thing is to make it easier and to make it more likely that they'll actually show up at a hearing.
Do you still want them to have the option of attaching budget sheets from previous years?
I don't think we need it if we have these questions.
Okay.
I don't think. we
Okay.
do.
Really, now it's yours.
Deborah,
I really hope I didn't make this overly complicated. Does anybody that was here with us last year have the Cdac for Parks and Rec? The only reason I'm asking is I just hope I'm not confusing everybody. They did do an A through H as to what their departmental, almost like the bullet point that you're speaking about. And then they did a listing for the cycles. that was helpful. That's what I was trying to. I think we're talking about the same thing, but
Yeah,
I'm not
because
positive.
I think, if I may, the problem there might be other departments might not use the same format, and it might be asking them to, yet do another step in the process. So unfortunately, unless this is a uniform thing that all the departments do, I don't think it would work.
Trying to use Parks and Recs is the example to go forward on, because I wasn't sure if it was just something that we had hopefully in our packets from the past year.
If we have the bullet point specifications that you have there, does that meet your criteria? Or does that answer the things you'd be asking them for?
For me, it did. That's why I was trying to show them as being, for me, the gold standard. I just like,
Right,
it
right.
was easily explainable. It was a quick, very narrative.
We could also
plus
mention the fact that Parks did not show up for our hearings either. So they do very good paperwork, but they didn't come. So this is what we're battling against, So if we have the bullet points, then everybody's okay with that? Okay, I really am.
I have a thought for C
Okay.
that maybe I should preface with a question. So B and C, I would imagine, look very similar from year to year. So would it make more sense or be more helpful in our discussion to revise C to more of a, do you anticipate using CDBG funds for any new activities this year after we've asked them about their previous funding uses? Because otherwise, I would imagine, again, that B and C just end. up
Cut
looking
and
the same.
paste is what
Right.
I envision,
Okay, then yes.
right?
So that would be my recommendation for C.
I will say though, that certain things like the parks needs to be very specific parks projects, and like DPW needs to be very specific street projects. So those need to be defined. So I don't know if those are considered new or if those are considered revisions of the old.
Sure.
Instead of the word the programs would indicate that this could include new, or we could say, describe the programs existing and new that you would like.
But I think Rebecca's point was that if we're gonna have them go into depth in the previous question, that if
But
we're,
that's the previous, now we're asking them what you want to do moving forward. Are they the same? Or are they different? You got new ideas?
as you said, existing or new. If
For-
it's
for
existing,
C.
then it would be the previous.
Well, we
Wouldn't
want to
it?
clarify what we're asking them for. Because
Okay.
what we're asking them for is has anything, I mean, how do we word that? Has anything changed, or are you looking for more new?
I think to Steve's point, if it's not always going to be the same, like cut and paste, which it will be for some and won't
Mm.
be
It
for
won't be
others,
for others,
then
exactly.
the like existing and new. I think what I was going for is just an opportunity for them to identify what's going to be new rather than us having to figure out the distinction.
Could we
Of the
say
names
if you
of the-
have,
sorry.
if you have any, if you want to do new programs? In other words, if we've got B and it says what we're doing with the previous funding, C could then say, do you plan on doing any new programs with CDBG money? We could do it that way. And then if they don't, then if it's, not applicable, they can go on to D.
How about we say something of the nature, describe any new programs or any new features from existing programs or specifics on expansion of existing programs, like the names of streets, the names of parks, what playground, et cetera. Does that make sense or no?
Sort of. I'm trying to figure out how to word it.
Yeah, that's my
Uh,
problem. But makes a great question as long as you can put all 50
So,
words in there.
yep, so describe previous CDBG funding uses is good for B, and then describe any anticipated new activities or program features that you're requesting CDBG funding for this year.
Anticipated new what?
Steve, I had it in my head.
Programs.
Anticipated new activities or program features.
And in parentheses, you can always put street names, parks, whatever, for examples.
E.G. Okay. Describe anticipated or new activities or program features, example, streets and parks that you would like paid for with CDBG funding.
Sounds good to me. You're just expanding line C.
Yeah, this is just C.
Yeah.
Anticipated or new programs or features, example, streets/parks.
That would be paid for. with
Describe
the-
any anticipated new new activities or program features.
You could say anticipated changes in existing and new. The elephant that we're building looks very funny, doesn't he?
Just watching Stephen trying to write down what we were saying.
Can I just add that I think I agree with your saying, but I think we need to make it as simple as possible because people will get turned off or just like, oh, I'm not going to bother. You know, they're just going to answer it the way they want to answer it. You know what I mean? I mean, some departments don't even follow this.
They need the money. Like, I don't think it's an unreasonable expectation to ask them to answer 5 questions.
No,
to
I
get-
agree, but
funding.
as simple as possible. Like, I think line C is, I think that's good, the way it is, as far as we're asking them what programs or activities that you'd like paid for with the funding. I think that's simple and to the point.
I can
Should
tell
we
you
do
in
that
in
this-
past experiences, I have had city departments call me up and ask me what these individual questions, the current questions mean, that it's confusing.
Oh, God.
That has happened. But yeah, they generally just copy and paste the previous years and common. That's standard.
Copy and paste. I'm telling you, I've seen it
The nonprofit agencies with the applications you're going to go to do the exact same thing.
with the
They-
same spelling mistakes from year to year.
Well, they basically just take the old one and update it the year, and that's it. They resubmit it, and I catch them every single year. I can tell exactly. who they-
Lower my expectations is what you're saying.
No, I'm
Yes.
just telling you that is generally the reality of the situation.
I'm being honest.
I would love you guys to
I
come
am not
into.
great at lowering my expectations,
I
but fine.
invite you to come to City Hall when I get the application.
Reviewed applications.
And
The-
I'm collating them for you guys, and you should just see me. I'm constantly like, nope. 10 copies. I asked for 14, so I'm gonna make copies and be like, oh, they left off half the pages. The one
mean,
guy who said, name of agency. There you go. Nothing else is
Yeah.
written on the entire application. I
just-
contacted that individual and told them, we're not accepting your application.
So I'll save this and then we can move on because I realize we have an agenda, but one of our conversations when we were looking at the budget in the spring was a frustration that some agencies and or departments
Mhm.
simply felt that they were entitled to the funding. And I'm not at all trying to make it difficult, but again, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect them to be able to articulate and represent where the funds are going. Because we're responsible for the city is responsible for these funds.
Think we should make it clear to the departments that if you don't thoroughly answer the questions on the sheet, we're going to drill you for those answers when you're here. Right?
I mean,
And
you can put in there, I mean, I can put it in there. I didn't really follow what you guys were saying on the intro, but we can include on the intro section that, I don't know, inconsistencies or missing information will be something. I don't, to try to clarify that, you need to provide the information or we'll get somehow.
You could
Well,
be
they-
positive and say that providing this information does give us what we need and we won't bother you then.
and please show up.
Until you show up, but then, you know, working off this sheet makes it easier. So
Yeah.
if you want to spend less time at the hearing, fill out this paper. How
I'm
do you
not sure how to
that?
put that in writing
How
in
do
a
you put that
respectful way.
Government bureaucratic language.
We reserve the right to draw negative inferences based on their efforts or lack thereof.
I like that,
That's so negative though.
But
but it's
Very good.
honest.
Um,
another paragraph that says, filling this out to the best of your ability and as clearly as you can will help the process. So do it.
In bold.
um, Answering completely and in detail will expedite the funding process.
Mhm,
I like using expedite.
that works.
That'll
In
work.
bold still.
So that'll be up at the top. Yep, I can bold it. I can even underline it if you want.
I don't think we have a colored budget, so it's gonna have to be in bold and black and white. You don't have a colored copier, right?
I do.
Marianne wants that line in red.
In red. I mean, it's something I'm digitally email to people, so they'll. Oh, okay, okay.
Oh,
So right now we have an additional section to the beginning that's in red and bolded. We have an additional question between B and C, talking up a percentage of your budget, and I'll go over this all at the end. And then we update C to include anticipated new programs or features, example, specific streets, parks. That's what I have updated so far on the form.
I think that actually clarifies more of the question to see when they call and ask by putting in the parentheses of what, like, kind of thing you're talking about. I think helps clarify the question. D,
Justin,
Oh,
to
sorry.
go along with that, are there any recommendations from you, Steve, with the questions you've had from department heads? Is there any guidance you could give to us for helping to improve this?
I don't like giving recommendations to CDAC, but I can say in a sort of general sense, the simpler it is, the better it is to answer. I think this form helps out from previous years where we just said, provide us a budget, and then they just would have like a printed sheet and handed it in. So the questions help. I mean, the sectioned questions help. I think almost every agency filled this out. I don't think anyone didn't or skipped questions. So if you had any issues with the answers they had for specific questions or wish they had answered more in specific questions, we can definitely update these questions to address that. So.
I'm good with D.
E,
E feels confusing or like too many words.
It's somewhat addressed in C now that you've updated C to sort of talk about new or existing.
Yeah, I think the intent seems to be what specific challenges has your department encountered when attempting to use CDBG funds?
I would say I think it's a good idea to leave a challenge question in there simply because I specifically know what departments, the challenges department, it's almost always capital projects, could be parks and streets. I know that what challenges they have, they're pretty much the same year to year, so maybe you don't need them because they're probably not going to change, but individual department heads may have issues.
Yeah, I agree leaving a challenge, like asking them to describe the challenges. I just don't know that second
I don't like
sentence
the
is used.
wording of the second
Yeah.
sentence. I liked what you just said though, the last time.
Oh, boy.
The challenge, and then Steve started talking and I was like, oh.
Did you write down what I said, Steve?
I-
Describe the challenges your department encountered when attempting to use CDBG funds.
Well, I kind of condensed E to say, discuss specific issues using CDBG funds or challenges or problems you have experienced using CDBG funds in the past.
That's fine. That clears it up.
Does that sort of meld that all together? Okay. The what? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, there's also, yeah, there's typos, yeah. I'll clear up the typos.
Any other comments on this page? Any other suggestions?
And I'll go over it before we vote.
Okay, we'll go over it in its entirety before we vote on it. Moving on to the community agency questionnaire.
Could I ask a quick point of order question? So I know we went back and forth in the email thread a bit earlier today, and I didn't see an update on the agenda. There was a request last meeting that we talk about code enforcement restructure. Is that happening?
You can just
This-
add it to the agenda. You can just add it.
I can add it to the agenda, I'm told.
I began
I
the
can pull up the
meeting,
exact wordage. That was-
Rebecca, I began the meeting with this because I wanted that presentation to be for our chairperson. So
Oh, okay.
it was because he wasn't here on time that we did it that way. I hope that explains it.
Yeah. Yep, totally fine. Whatever works for y'all. We can do the community, like we can take care of business that needs to be voted on before that too. It's up to.
I was looking for your wordage of that question to add to the. Do we want to do this right now, or do we want to do it after this sheet? Yes? Okay. All right. So community agency questionnaire,
Okay, let's see another one. So just to clarify for the community agency questionnaire, this is for specifically for stakeholder agencies that are not applying. So this is for example, say Rise, we will invite them, provide them this questionnaire and say, you may come present to us. We would love you to fill out this questionnaire. Generally, the questionnaire is well received by those agencies. They don't generally come, but some do. The whole point is to get a stakeholder's perspective on clients with unmet needs in the community. But at the same time, you don't want to give an agency that's getting or applying for funding that sort of platform to simply say why they need to get all the money because their clients are being affected more than anyone else's clients. So it's useful to get these. We try to reach out to veterans groups, DV groups, STIC. I generally reach out to STAP because they get the Hopeful grant. They don't go through us, just to talk about various communities. So we always try to be as broad-minded as possible. I do a lot of invites, but only a few agencies respond. So that's the point of this questionnaire.
Could we include a paragraph like we have on the uniform, a short paragraph at the top that explains to these agencies why we want them to fill this out, how it helps us?
So the first section of the uniform, the in and order for CDAC members, blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah.
Mhm.
Okay.
And we could tweak it a little bit saying, as a stakeholder in the community, we appreciate this very much. We have to let them know that we know we're asking them for something above and beyond.
Yeah, that's the thing. Remember, they're not getting any money. They're not,
Exactly.
there's no money here for them. So
Exactly.
it's definitely,
So the.
It's always very
explanation
useful to get the
That-
take.
Yeah, I love that
The
idea.
take of other groups
for
that,
that approach.
what the need is within various communities within our community.
I think in that context, the only thing that I would consider adding to number 3 specifically is at the beginning, like keeping that first sentence, but in front of it, what gaps do you believe exist in local services for the population you serve? And then what further resources would be helpful?
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I
But
agree.
could-
I
could
think
we make-
it's vague.
Could we make what gaps number 3 and then number 4 would be as a standalone? Because then they could go into more detail about the gaps. I mean, if we include it in the last thing, then we're asking a lot of things. So if we make this into 4 questions, very specific questions, because I like the idea about the gap.
I
Can
wrote
you-
down what gaps in services do your clients experience? You want to sort of,
Because then they're speaking on behalf of their clients. If we're asking them to represent what they observe.
Well,
What
yeah.
gaps do you think exist within our community for that?
For the clients you serve.
Yeah, for the clients.
And then leave 3 as it is, or change that to tweak that.
I think 3 then, and,
Yeah,
this is the
3, yeah.
problem. Here's what we think for the
Change 3 to
resources
4.
are. Yeah.
that.
Yep.
Okay.
so
like-
what gaps in the community do your clients experience?
Regarding services, yeah.
What is it?
Regarding services.
Regarding services? Okay.
Isn't it the other way around? What gaps in services
Yeah.
Okay, what gaps in
Do your
services
clients experience, yeah.
do your clients
And
experience
that would be question 3.
within our community? And then
Yeah.
then
4,
And then
or,
4 would be this one.
yeah, the
All right.
question as is.
what gaps in services do your clients experience within our community? Okay. As question 3.
And then question 4 is what was 3. Okay. All right. Anything further on either of these documents? Before we review them and put them up for a vote?
Yeah, do you want to do those separately, or do you want to do the RFP, or do you want to save that as a later one, or?
Yeah, I think we should take care of these 2 documents. Then I want to add to our agenda Rebecca's presentation and then go into the RFP. If that is okay with everybody? Yes, no, maybe so? Yes, Deborah?
I just have a concern about Rebecca's presentation, and I'll speak directly to you regarding this. It is a campaign year, and this presentation is before our election in November. I didn't think it would be, so I just checked your Facebook, and this is page today for the first time. This was one of the issues, code enforcement, that you have brought up. And I just have a concern because you have shown yourself the YouTube clips from, for example, I believe it was the August meeting for the extra addition to our charter.
The unhoused status.
Correct.
Legislation that I
Right,
submitted.
so that was my question. It's something I thought of, just wanted to bring that up. I don't believe you meant it that way, but I just wanted to say that was a concern I had, if anybody else had that for discussion, but just wanted to be open and transparent with that.
Sure, and I can speak to that briefly if folks would like me to, or if not sure.
Can we address that, Deborah, after we vote on these first 2 that has nothing to do with that?
Just the only reason I brought it up now is because you were asking in regards to adding it to the agenda.
Right, but that we were gonna add that to the agenda after we voted on these two things, so,
Fine, I have no problem with that.
okay, thank you. So we'll get back to Deborah's concern and your agenda addition after we go over these two documents and approve as Stephen has them. So Stephen, can you please read to us what you have for the CDAC uniform interview page for CDBG funds?
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. So if you look at the uniform interview page, under the top section, underneath that, we'll have in red bold, bad handwriting. Answering completely and in detail will expedite funding process. I might clean that up a little bit. Down to question B, we have described previous CDBG funding uses in last full fiscal year, which I will define for a range. The next question is a new one. So it'll be between B and C. What percentage of your overall budget is CDBG, and how will the lack of CDBG funding impact your department? Now C has been updated. Describe any anticipated new programs or activities. Any activities or program features, example, specific streets or parks that you would like paid for with CDBG funding.
That becomes D.
Yeah, that would be the new D. D would be the new E. And then E is updated to say discuss specific issues using CDBG funds or problems you've experienced using CDBG funds in the past. Or sorry, discuss specific issues using CDBG funds or challenges or problems you've experienced using CDBG funds in the past. And that's what I have.
Can I make one small suggestion on that one? When, and I can't remember which line it was, but where we talked about street names, parks.
Yeah.
Maybe, maybe also add in position or positions, because a lot of the departments, is my understanding, use it for positions, you know, staffing positions, and I think that would fit in there nicely
Comma.
for a number of them.
Example, specific streets, parks, comma, positions.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that gets it beyond just parks and rec. The other two feel like they're pretty specific.
Just so you're aware, the only 3 salary positions that are eligible, and they're kind of all eligible for different reasons. Police overtime, because it wouldn't be standard. It's not standard city expenses because it's overtime. You couldn't pay for regular police. You can pay for overtime police in specific areas. Park Rangers is a new program that has been partially funded from CDBG from the beginning. So it sort of continues on. It's a salaried expense, and it applies to any park in the city because we divided the city into 2 sections and both qualified. And then the final one would be code enforcement. It qualifies simply because code enforcement is under its own sort of thing, eligible activity under CDBG. Oh, and I forgot planning and admin, but we'll talk about that when I present, so. But I can definitely add that in there, so the specific positions.
All right. Any other suggestions on it? Do we vote on it per line, or do we want to vote on it as a per page? Just a page.
Yeah.
All right. So do we want to roll call this, or do we just want to do an aye, yay, nay thing? Okay, then. All right, here we go. For the CDAC uniform interview page for CDBG funds, those who approve,
Well,
say,
you have to have a first. And you have to.
oh,
Yeah.
anyone
I'll motion.
second?
Second.
All right, all in favor of this new form?
I
Against? Hearing none, seeing it, unanimous. All right, now for our second form, the Department of Housing and HUD Administration Community Agency Questionnaire for our stakeholders. Do we have a motion to accept this page? Oh, he hasn't read it yet.
Yeah. So the top
that
part will
stuff.
be the exact same top part from the uniform interview page, excluding the new red bolded section. But we will put a nice little, I don't know, I'll even put it in an italic section that basically says, we thank you, we appreciate you providing this information. Other than that, there will be a new question 3 that says, what gaps in services do your clients experience within our community? And then question 4, or the current question 3 is then becomes question 4. So it's just adding a new question. And that's the only change I have.
All right, do we have a motion to accept the new page as is? Second? All right, all in favor?
Hi.
Aye.
Against? Hearing or seeing none, that is unanimous. All right, so now let's address Rebecca's presentation and Deborah, your concerns.
Thank you very much for listening. One thing I wanted to add, and maybe this is something we can come up as a group. As I understand it, because we have not submitted specific written questions for code, then it's not able to come in for a presentation. So I'm very interested in doing both, but would like us to come up with the written requests for questions so that we can actually have that open door with them.
Okay. Is that something we can do?
I sent the email out asking for questions. Yeah, if you submit any questions you have, and it's not for code, it's for the new code attorney, unless you want code to answer questions, submit them to me and we'll send them on to legal and see if we can arrange time for them to come in and answer those specific questions.
Okay. Good, Deborah? Hold on 1 second. Thing floating right there. It's driving me insane. Do you see it? I probably look insane on the video, right? There's something. It keeps getting closer to me.
Probably just a spider web or something. Very,
Do you see that?
no.
I thought it was my glasses, so I took my glasses off. It's not. It's floating right there. It's about a foot from the front of this, coming right down.
I don't see any.
And there's like a white piece, maybe a foot and a half or 2 feet up of.
Yeah, I mean, what did you
I
have?
I had a no frills mocha latte. Okay. I'm allergic to a lot of spiders. Now you got me nervous. I thought it was just like a big dust bunny or something floating there. All right, Rebecca, I apologize for that. Do we want to hear her whole presentation? May I add that to the calendar? Do we have a motion to add Rebecca to the calendar? Do I not need to? No? Okay. Then I'm going to add that your presentation, then we can decide what to do from there. Deborah, you agree to that? Okay, thank you. Rebecca,
Do
the
you-
floor is yours.
Thank you. Do you want me at all to address Deb's concerns?
Before or after, Deborah, how would you like your concerns met?
However she'd like to approach it, that is fine for me.
I'm sure. I'm
Okay.
happy to speak to it quickly. And again, I know we're tight on time, so I will try to keep this as informational and brief as well. It is true that it's an election year. It is true that I'm running for city council. I would say I'd otherwise not at all mention that at this table because of any concerns of overlap. But since it was brought up, I hope it's okay that it's represented. It's also true that I've worked within the local homelessness services sector for 18 years and that I was appointed to lead Executive Garner's Safe Housing Task Force in 2017, 2018, 2019. That involved bi-weekly meetings with the then code enforcement director and code enforcement personnel. And I started recommending proactive code enforcement locally and detailing out narratives of what that could look like in 2017. So this isn't new for me. It's not related specifically to a campaign. I do have a housing policy strategy that identifies preservation and involves code. But again, the context of, and this is where I was hoping to kind of start this presentation, just to remind folks why we got to the conversation, is that we increased the CDBG demolition and blight removal line during the Cdac FY50 budget discussions. It was a request that was discussed from the mayor due largely to the anticipated need to demolish several Anzarud properties. Cdac members spoke at length about this particular budget line item. It was $450K, I believe, for demolition and blight removal, compared to the just under 215,000 that was reimbursed to code enforcement. So and please correct me if I'm wrong, but again, just framing it as I remember the conversation, there was a strong consensus among the group that continued to increase funding for demolition as a response to deteriorating stock, rather than proactively funding code enforcement to prevent deterioration, is unsustainable and ineffective. So we talked about the potential of increasing CDBG dollars to code in upcoming budget years, but also agreed that code operations would need to be restructured and likely code ordinances revised in tandem with that increase in order to ensure an actual effective implementation. So that's the context that I remember that came to this point. If others remember differently, absolutely, please feel free to say so.
I just want to make sure you're aware that code enforcement salaries are based, it's a formulaic calculation based off of locational performance. And so like I generally put in there the max, and that's based off the last full 12 months worth
Yep.
of eligible activities. So if you do increase that, it may not actually go to them because they may not do the current staff doing it may not do the work in the area that's required
It's
to generate the salary
primarily-
expenses.
Yep,
anyway.
it's a, thank you for that. It is and I'll define that a bit too in this proposal. It's primarily a staff and jurisdictional location restructure. And the recommendation that I'm about to walk through, it's just one piece of at least likely 3 aspects of current code enforcement operations that would need to be restructured in tandem, as we've discussed. And I built the framework in the context of moving from a reactive code enforcement system to a proactive code enforcement model in a way that essentially addresses the implementation challenges and liability concerns that function as barriers to implementing our current ordinances on the books. So our current structure has, we have a Binghamton Code ordinance, rental registration in our city charter that was adopted in 2013. It's not presently enforced. It requires every owner of a rental property. There's some caveats there. But to complete and file a rental registration application with the city clerk that identifies property information, also requires triennial inspections and certificate of compliance prior to occupancy. The initial implementation in 2013 saw just 50% participation from local property owners and about 50% of registered units inspected. And the primary implementation challenge that was represented to that not being fully implemented is one of the primary implementation challenges that code enforcement very consistently brings up. And the first one is Tom Costello, the prior code enforcement director, Chris Schleider, the current director, consistently cite limited staff, so limited capacity, and gaining access to occupied units as barriers to implementation. And this is where it gets into what Steve just represented. The limited staff piece comes down to funding and is a product of the current organizational structure of the department. So only about 50%, what Steve just said, of current code officer salaries are eligible for CDBG reimbursement. It's currently tracked, if you look at the budget, under CDBG as admin and planning, that code enforcement, inspection and enforcement services line. We saw in our discussions this spring, they expended just under $250K in 2023, had just under $290 available. We're only eligible to be reimbursed for $215,000. Code enforcement officers are not required to, and Steve, feel free to stop me at any point if any of this is incorrect. Code enforcement officers currently have defined jurisdictions. They're somewhat all over the place. None of them target the low income and deteriorated areas that would be specifically eligible for CDBG reimbursement. So we don't currently have code enforcement officers where 100% of their targeted jurisdiction falls within that limited low income deteriorated area eligibility criteria. Code officers are not required to, and so do not track their CDB eligible activities separately. It's my understanding that the city's HUD administration and housing manager, Steve, geocodes officers' inspection reports to determine which areas are eligible for reimbursement. Code enforcement is, however, not only within our CDBG budget as a line item, but it's its own eligible activity under CDBG. So code salaries, training, other associated costs are eligible for reimbursement. And so the first, I would say, phase of the proposed code enforcement restructure specifically to address limited capacity is to dedicate solely CDBG eligible areas. So 100% of a code enforcement officer's salary can be reimbursed by those CDBG funds. So we're no longer doing just half of the code budget or half of some, or a quarter or a third. The steps, as I understand them, to get there would be likely Steve or the HUD office within the city creating 1 to 2 jurisdictions comprising CDBG eligible neighborhoods. Then city council approving an operational restructure that assigns or reassigns. And Steve, I feel like I can see your brain moving with the assign or reassign, so I'll address that. But city council to approve an operational restructure that assigns or reassigns 1 to 2 code enforcement officers to those newly created solely CDB eligible jurisdictions. And then city council, and this is where our recommendation is CDAC could come in, but city council to increase that code enforcement inspection and enforcement services BLI to cover staff increases as needed, or just add a new BLI to the code budget. I'm not sure what the preference would be there. The caveat to assigning or reassigning to code enforcement officers, typically CDBG funds may not be used to fund a current or already paid position. I believe there's some nuance with code, and I'll leave that to Steve to define. But either way, it would potentially require City Hall to hire a new position or two to cover those newly created jurisdictions. But I don't believe that impacts the overall if we can increase the budget to support them. So that is the first phase.
Can I just ask a question? I don't know if you know this or not, but are there any currently unfilled code enforcement positions?
I believe so. I don't know if they're code enforcement officers as much as inspectors.
Okay.
I know we're missing an electrical inspector. I don't know about the code enforcement officers. To address, yes, what you're saying tactically could work. It may not have to go to city council. It may simply be an administrative change. In other words,
Even better.
mayor sits with Chris and they hammer out, this is, you need to change it. I cannot speak for Chris. Working with him, I kind of have expectations of how he'll react to this, but I will not go into that. What you're saying is technically possible. So yeah, we can, now most of the areas of the city are LMI. So just be aware of that. Areas that would not be LMI, so just if you want to know, is South Side West, South Side East, a good chunk of the West Side, and then one section around Fairview Park. Generally, everything else in the city is LMI. I mean, that's a good chunk. I mean, it's not too hard to think where all the rich people live, but not there. And wherever the rich people are not, it's probably LMI. So you had said there was one question you did have. I can't remember what you had.
I'm somewhat unclear. So generally CDBG funds may not be used to fund a current or
Oh.
already paid position.
Yep, I can address that.
But I feel like there's nuance.
No, the code enforcement does not. That's generally it's
Okay.
when almost every time they're talking about that, they're talking about service programs, using service funding for something like that. So you couldn't pay for police, you couldn't use CDBG to provide a service that the city was providing previously, normally. So overtime is, I mean, HUD lets us do it. I think it's a little wiggly in my opinion, but they allow us to do it, so we do it. The park rangers was a brand new one, has been funded with CDBG since, but yeah, code enforcement. A lot of the planning and admin salaries and housing salaries qualify just because they have to. You couldn't just say that that was a previous one. So I'm not sure what the I don't want to say economic, the funding impact would be. So currently, you're right, I geocode it. What happens is code officers and not code inspectors, so not like the building inspectors, but the actual code enforcement officers that go out on a call, they enter something into a database system. So every 4 months, I'll get a printout. Well, I'll get an Excel spreadsheet. I don't print it out. Pulled from them. We clean up the data, which takes a bit. We send it to Broome County GIS to geocode. They tell us whether they're in an LMI area or not. And then we have to go through and determine if the call was to what's considered a deteriorated or blighted property. This is somewhat subjective. Code enforcement officers can say whether a property is blighted or deteriorated. They don't always. So then we kind of have to make a judgment call. If the code enforcement officer says, I went out there was a giant hole in the ceiling, I go, that's a deteriorated property. It'd be easier to probably just say which things are not deteriorated. So deteriorated would probably not include snow removal, garbage removal, anything that's not actually an activity, is not actually a problem. Trying to think what else. Things I always look for when I go through it, anything that says broken windows, holes in the roofs, holes in the walls, leaking, infestations. Those are generally the things I'm looking for if code does not call it as deteriorated. So property to be qualified, it has to be LMI, it has to be deteriorated. Now, all code enforcement officers, and I know this has been a contentious issue before, my understanding is they still do it, are supposed to, when they get called out on every property, is to offer a form that lists available resources, both from the city and the county and various service projects and activities, including connection numbers for homeless, because they do run into squatters every now and then. And basically, when they do a call, they run into a person living at the unit they are inspecting. They say, have you ever gotten one of these forms? Would you like a form? Some people say no, they mark it, but they're supposed to try to hand out a form to everyone. So those three qualifying factors, LMI, deteriorated, and connecting people with resources, those are what qualify somebody for CDBG. So then what I do, once I get all this big Excel spreadsheet done, I can say, for Joe Smith's time from this date to this date, he did 100 unique calls, and 40 of qualify under those three factors. So 40% of the salaries he generated during that period of time are CDBG eligible. It's kind of weird, but HUD allowed us to do this because they got on our case a few years ago about this. So we've been pretty strict about this. Yes, adding a new one that's specifically LMI would make it easy for that one individual. Because we could just qualify all of their time, assuming they only did, I mean, I wouldn't even check it, but it would be under the assumption they only did the LMI areas. I'm not sure how code breaks down the zones that they go after. I'm not sure if there's, I don't know the term to use. Think of it like a fire. If there's a fire in a fire zone that is outside one fire company, they still may send someone. The same applies to code, same applies to police. So that could be problematic depending on how often it happens. For example, the LMI dedicated code officer if because of vacations or just because they're, 2 blocks over from a non-LMI zone, they may get sent to a building for a call. I don't know how prevalent that would be. I don't know. And the reverse can happen too. Someone outside an LMI zone could come into an LMI zone and do an inspection. So I don't believe they're here's, Court Street, don't go, that's my territory, North Court Street. You get the south side. No, it's not as that defined from my understanding. It's a lot looser than that. So
I think
it may-
that's part of the proposal would
Yeah.
be to more strictly define those jurisdictions and those areas. And I mean, not mentioned here and likely we don't have time to get into it, but that has proved effective in upstate areas like Syracuse, where those jurisdictions, those officers are now getting to know the tenants and households in their specific areas. It feeds into a more, again, proactive and collaborative. So I think the question would be whether or not Chris would be amenable to a jurisdictional restructure in terms of the targeted locations of officers based likely on your recommended kind of geocode outline.
I mean, I can always geocode area. Well, I mean, you can just see it from the maps on what areas are eligible. But remember what I was talking about last time is if you guys want to do a geographic distinction in the next con plan, this could feed into that where you say we want to fund a code enforcement officer for this one neighborhood or geographical boundary we've defined. And we want a dedicated code officer for this. We're going to specify projects to go in here and address this area. This is something you could add into that where you define an area for that, but just giving you that option if you so chose to do that.
That's all I had for my presentation on this particular aspect. Not sure what the questions or next steps are. Oh, sorry, I just said I'm not sure if the group defines next steps or if we just call that discussion.
The only comment I would like to make is just thinking back about Chris Schleider's presentations that he's done. To me, the standout takeaway points from him were that, first of all, I thought he was very beleaguered. I felt like he was just really beaten down by just what
I
code
agree.
enforcement is in the city. And that the bottom line was that they just could not pay good enough to keep good people in the department. So they were always shorthanded. And I don't know if that is anything that CBDG funding can do to help him, because I think it was a very valid point that he was making. And also the big takeaway was that really the only thing code can do is to, if it's safety, what were the three things? Health, safety, and Marianne, can you think of the three things he said? That they were the only things that they really could impact or react to.
I think what I remember is he was saying that they are not really proactive. They are reactive to complaints. And that was his big thing. He also had the audacity to say that there weren't many slums in Binghamton, which was incredible to me because I live in the middle of one. I like your idea, but it seems that if we don't get the other pieces working up and running, that we're not going to get anywhere because Mr. Schleider makes the fact that, the city is overwhelmed with these kind of properties as an excuse for code, and then they blame the courts. Well, we send our stuff to the courts and then the courts do this. So unless we look at this holistically, and if we make this recommendation to city council and to the mayor's office, we have to say that this has to be done in tandem with a larger reform. Because at the First Ward Neighborhood Watch meetings, that's all we talk about is the failure of code. My neighbors are so tired of turning in properties that are next door to them where the people are just horrible. And this includes tenants too, So yeah, if we were going to do something like this, the caveat being we only make a recommendation. That's all we can do, is to say, this is what we'd like to do. But we'd also like to see all these other pieces fit together. So a presentation in front of city council and the mayor might be incumbent upon us.
Sure.
So we have our questions that we can now submit to the new housing lawyer portion. And I think that's part of this whole thing. Let's get some answers. Let's get them in front of us so that we can put together in our recommendations to city council what we think should be happening in tandem, so that it all happens simultaneously. And I think we can increase the funding if we have officers who are just can't we work with city council or whomever to set the pay scale for someone who might have to work in Blight all the time?
Well, remember, pay scale is going to be a union issue.
No.
It's difficult to go in and say, give officers more money, give code enforcement officers more money without there being a whole union issue with it. So it can be more complex than that. I will say, though, that if you decided to fund a position in a specific, like, you can use the 12-month average for all of code enforcement. But if you said you wanted to hire someone new that would do 100% code enforcement in an LMI area, you could simply say that, and then 100% of the salary would be reimbursable under CDBG.
Right. That was like kind of my,
Yeah,
it's
it's
so perfectly stated, but yes, my
definitely
point.
no question that there are at least two other aspects that would need to be implemented in tandem. So if it's an ongoing conversation, I mean, the legislative piece, the ordinance piece in particular, yes, pretty solely a city council and mayor, but consideration. So, I mean, and I know those conversations we're not the only group having conversations, but I think if we are an advisory council, we have the opportunity to share what we learn, and make the recommendation.
I think we're one of the best placed agencies to make those recommendations because most of what we deal with is LMI and we see the whole picture. So I would think that our recommendation could be very strong to do such a thing if we can do it.
Yep.
And keeping within our parameters, saying, look, we know we're only one piece of the puzzle, but this is what we can contribute to a problem that we see that is only growing bigger and bigger.
And if we are discussing it in tandem with the lawyers who are going to the courts, which are frustrating, the code enforcement department, which is frustrating all of our neighbors and residents in our communities. I mean, I think all of us have dealt with it in some nature. I know Mary Ann and I have it literally around us. I have a home next to me now that was just purchased for 40 grand over asking. That was disaster. The basement is literally falling in. I can look into the basement from my driveway, and they put lipstick on a pig, and they're now renting the upstairs apartment with a hole in the ceiling or the roof to a family with 4 kids. And I'm like,
Yep.
I don't know how this is inhabitable and how they're letting kids go into that, but they are.
I'm trying to remember back to Mr. Schleider's presentations. Does anyone recall the training that goes into becoming a code enforcement officer?
He didn't mention it.
There is a certification. I mean, you have to have certification. You have to go through training and coursework, and it has to be annually recertified. Or at least portions have to be annually recertified.
I do remember him saying, we get them, we train them, and they leave us for higher paying places.
Right. I'm curious. We have a number of people who are very interested in code issues. I mean, what about a program that can train auxiliary code officers or something to that effect, that can do some ancillary work?
That's working elsewhere. So the model, at least the model that I'm aware of related to that, is code enforcement officers who have targeted jurisdictions, who develop relationships with community members, who then have the opportunity to represent that they would like to consider being trained for this. So it becomes that kind of collaborative relational piece.
Deborah, did you have a question? I saw you leaning in.
Trying to provide some context. We had that presentation, John. It was at our January 31st, 2024. And some of the code enforcement was degradation of neighborhood, adverse impact, vacant and neglected. And in consideration of every violation, it was regarding fire and health, injury and death, paint chipping for the lead levels, if children would be impacted, and then neighboring property values. And then the other question we had, is there a vacancy? Yes, there is one vacancy for a code inspector, and that's for $44,261 per year.
By inspector, did he mean the electrical inspector?
No, it is specifically says code inspector because I verified that.
But I think when they say inspector, I think they mean like an inspector is not a code enforcement officer. Inspector is someone who goes out to see if the thing you're doing is compliant. That's why I'm kind of curious what he meant by that. Whether
Okay.
he's talking about a building inspector or electrical inspector, both of those aren't code enforcement officers. Those wouldn't be CDBG coverable things. They go out because someone's building new and they inspect the construction to make sure it meets New York State requirements. But if it's a code enforcement officer, that's where you're enforcing the existing code for, already built property.
That would be very clever to ask of civil service to see what that means.
Mhm. And I also want to talk to about John's thing about training. The issue with training for a non-current code enforcement officer is that it may not qualify under the code enforcement eligibility of CDBG. So guess what that falls under if you don't do it as code. If you don't fall under any other category, guess what it falls under? Service funding, which means then you have the service funding cap. That's always like, you can do so many things with CDBG, but the vast majority of them fall under service funding, which is limited. So if you don't have these specific sort of call outs, it is more difficult. But I can ask Rashika, our HUD rep, what she thinks, and maybe we'll get some feedback from her on that and let you know. I'll mark it down as something.
Please do.
Thanks.
That would be a great question for our attorney.
$5 says she sends me the HUD manual like she always.
Any other comments in regards to Rebecca's presentation?
No, just thank you for that information, Rebecca. Thanks.
Thank you for the chance to share.
All right. So I don't think there's anything we can actually do on that at the moment, but I do believe that it does get the brain working for questions that we need to submit to Stephen for the attorneys. And I think it does begin to definitely put my list of questions together for when code's in front of us. What we need to reach out to our city councilmen about as citizens, not just members of this board. And then when we get answers to all the various questions, then we can start attacking it as we begin our recommendation process in the spring. Definitely. All right, our RFP. I don't have my glasses on. Sorry, I was trying to read.
This is the agency application for CDBG. I forgot to say, this is essentially also the one for ESG. I know Rebecca's going to ask, so I'll go ahead and say ESG is the same, except they also have to get a letter of support from the COC, be an active member, or they need to be an active member by the time they get funded. They must show their match requirement. They must show they can do a 50-50 match requirement, which is required under that grant. And they must select a specific ESG category, one of the 5 allowed uses: emergency shelter, street outreach, rapid rehousing, homeless prevention, HMIS. Just so you guys are aware, we never do we don't do admin under ESG anymore. So that frees up more funds for those programs. The only main difference to this from last year, had put in the mayor had put in a $20,000 minimum for service programs and $25,000 minimum for capital projects. So there was no maximum, it was just minimums.
And those suggestions remain for this year? Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen. On your list, it's FY 51 grant application updates. It's a voting item. It was throwing me off
Yes.
because at the top of it says 50th, but then I read the date and I was like, oh, this is ours from last year.
This is
So,
last year's, yes.
yeah. All right, do we have any suggestions on this? Changes to it? For those of us who've seen it numerous times?
I
Can I
think
ask a
one
quick
thing we want to
question?
do is not make it more complicated because poor Steve has enough trouble getting them to fill out what's already here.
I loved this when I was filling it out, when I was
Oh.
reviewing it. So, no, I think the simplicity of it, is fantastic. Could someone remind me, please? We discussed, how to talk with agencies who are being funded about how they're marketing
Oh.
their services to ensure it's the affirmative marketing like model, but not everything is housing. So how are they ensuring it that the opportunity to receive or participate in program or services is marketed to households who would not otherwise be aware of or pursue? Do you remember that conversation? Where did we land?
Is there
on?
federal wording that could be added to something, indicating another little section that you have to fill out specifically? Because I think as we told you, a lot of times we'll ask those questions during a public hearing, but they're sort of off the cuff. So are there any federal
I mean,
parameters that we could just include?
Not for non-housing projects. There's no affirmative marketing.
Okay.
could
so it
we
would be
use the
something
same
federally.
language? So affirmative marketing is um like how do they ensure, so to take out the housing piece, again, how do you ensure that the opportunity to participate in your services is marketed to households who might not otherwise, it's that last part that I'm not sure of, be aware of, seek out. It's that last part. And maybe we don't have to, that was something that felt important in our conversation.
I will say this, probably your bet, just from logistics, your best probably location for this will be under the narrative section. So if you turn to the,
Yeah.
be the backside of the third page
Mm-hmm.
where it says application instructions, your narrative is, between your narrative and your budget narrative, those are the only places sort of they can just onto the page. So, those are the best places to add sort of more complex questions that require more than just a small space to fill out. You can certainly add those to that or to one or the other. Probably the narrative is the most commonsensical one. Ironically, if you change it, that's going to be the exact thing I know if someone just copied and pasted from last year. As soon as they
So
say,
if
oh,
it's-
they didn't do the marketing thing.
The narrative
last
should
year's.
describe the program, indicate the unmet need the program addresses, and represent how you'll ensure the opportunity. That's a lot of words. How about,
And describe the marketing efforts of your organization to seek participants of the program.
Deborah?
Can we just say, John and I are both on this page, at least in the past, about what are your outreach activities? What have they been? What will they be?
outreaches?
Can that
That's-
just
That works.
bring it right down?
Yep.
Sorry. It's me now. You touched my microphone. I like the word outreach, Deborah. I do. Perfect.
Was my only thought, believe it or not.
How about the narrative should describe the program and indicate the unmet need the program addresses and client outreach process? That may be two
Outreach efforts
client
and
outreach
outreach,
efforts
program outreach efforts,
and client program,
no client, program outreach.
program. Well, because you do want, I mean, you're talking about outreaching to the clients,
Mhm.
right? Versus the program itself. So that's where I'm just confused. I want to make sure I'm getting what you guys want down on that.
And outreach efforts to potential clients.
Program outreach efforts to potential clients.
There we go.
Sign this off and bureaucracies. There should go, I'm gonna need to bring this in program outreach effort to potential clients. Okay.
Anything else?
I would still expect, is it okay to still expect the narrative to be one page? Like I will literally shred more than one page. I've threatened people with that before. As it was told to my old boss, if it takes more than a page to describe your program, you're asking for too much. So it's very specific, but it's very specific for a reason so that you guys don't have packets that are this thick.
Yep.
You know, each program is still pretty thick, and that's us condensing it down to this very defined narrative and description.
Anything else?
Took the
Okay.
DUNS number out, didn't I? Yes, okay. The feds, just for anyone's curious, the feds have stopped using DUNS number. I think they use employer ID number. They took the DUNS number away and they were like, now just use this thing that's not a DUNS number. So I think it's the employer ID number or it's the UEI, sorry, it's organization UEI. That replaces DUNS number now. It's the exact same
Where
thing.
are you?
Oh, sorry, application. The cover sheet,
The cover sheet of the application.
yes.
It's the narrative page we were on. Next one, flip over.
Sorry, I skip ahead. I mean, I can go through and sort of highlight some things we've made more recently. Overall, we changed it so that there's a minimum and not a cap. We included a section on both ESG and CDBG for faith-based organizations to meet federal law. I do an instructional training session before the applications are due. We put in here when they're supposed to return it. We usually give them about 30 days. We're talking here about the presentations, although we don't have a presentation schedule here, just that a presentation will be required.
Can we bold that?
What?
That it's required, so they show up?
Yeah, no, what's in there? It specifically says that it's required.
But can you bold that?
Yes. Bold that.
We've had them not showing up lately.
I want to stress that the one agency, that was my fault that they didn't show up because I did a mass email and I did not include their specific email. So this year I'm going to email everyone on the listserv just so everyone's aware of everything that's going on.
Anything else in this one?
I
Yeah,
don't
I'm just
think-
going
I don't
through any
think so.
updates and changes. One of the changes we did a few years ago and we still kept is things like their articles of incorporation. They have their stuff's good for 3 years. So if they've submitted something 2 years ago, I'm not going to make them submit bylaws and articles of incorporation every year. If they've submitted the last 3 years, they just indicate the year they did. Other than that, we try to keep it as simple as possible, sealed with a kiss, so they say. Yeah, and then for CDBG, yeah, we go over sort of general eligible activities and income limits. So that hits all the federal stuff, like the stuff I think is necessary federally. So then it's up to you guys if you want to add additional stuff.
I like it. I think that the revisions are fresh in our mind and I move to approve the RFP.
Can we pause that for just a moment? Deborah stepped away from her desk. I don't want to vote without her.
Sure.
While we're waiting, can you tell us what UEI is again, Steve,
Um,
for the dictionary that we're making?
uniform, something. I don't know. I go to the SAM system and yeah,
Uniform employment identification,
probably. I'm not sure.
employer, organization, UEI, uniform employment, employer.
Identifier, identification. What? You
Can
you
you get back?
desperately need to know the UA? Yeah,
An organizational UEI number.
yeah. What does the UAI stand for?
Any application, Joe?
It's on the application
Unique?
right here.
No. You,
Unique entity identifier.
unique entity identifier.
That replaces
UEI.
the
Oh, no.
old Dunn's number from Dunn's and Bradstreet. so.
We didn't know what that was either
No.
every time you said it, so it didn't matter.
But see, this is how cool. we
5
can look
years, I was
to
like,
our
"What?"
council people when we go back and say, the UEI number on this.
Oh, yeah, I use
organization.
acronyms to look
Yeah.
cool all the time.
Yeah,
Yeah, we do have.
It's not
two
even a joke.
what a
modifications,
great
so
CDAC we are.
Okay,
Whenever Deb comes back.
when she comes back, we'll reread the modifications and then
Still gotta do minutes.
we'll go back and we'll vote on that. Then we'll go back and vote to accept last week's minutes or well, 2 weeks ago's minutes.
Where did the sign up sheet end up?
I don't know. I didn't sign it either.
Doesn't it?
It was over there. Oh, it's right there. You guys all sign it?
Oh, I see.
She is back. They were trying to make motions without you sitting there and I paused that for you.
We were not. Don't listen to him.
I'm not making you look bad. He couldn't see her. He's.
Quick
All right.
question are the guidelines for applying for a certain amount, minimum of 20,000 going to be included?
Yes, so far. Unless you guys want to change it, but I know that the mayor really liked that. The mayor may even increase that number. I don't know, but he did like putting that minimum
I
threshold.
hate somebody that. 10,000.
I mean, I guess if an agency only wants 10,000, they should come up with a reason why they should get more. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I think almost every agency applied for the minimum. They read it carefully and did apply for the minimum last year.
All right, let's go back to where we were. John, you want to make your motion again, please?
Oh,
Oh.
okay. I gotta read it. I gotta read the changes.
Okay, hold on.
Yep.
Steven's gonna read the changes to the request for proposals, the RFP for fiscal year 51.
So on the first side of the second page, at the bottom where it says all applicants will be required to make presentations and some more language, I will bold that
Thank you.
so that that is stressed. And then on the back side of the third page where it says City of Binghamton application instructions at the top, we will update the narrative section. So the narrative section will stay as it is, but we will add in there, the narrative should describe the program, indicate the unmet need the program addresses, and program outreach efforts to potential clients. And that'll update that and address that issue. So that'll be included, that should be included in the narrative then.
Okay. Any further suggestions? Anything else before we close that on? No? All right. John,
I will make a motion to approve the RFP as edited.
second?
Second.
Whichever.
I got Rebecca.
Okay. All right. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, unanimous support. All right, back to what was originally number 2 on our agenda. I apologize for my lateness. Approval of the minutes from the 8/22 meeting. Do we have a motion to accept the minutes as is or any amendments?
I'll make a motion to approve the August 22nd.
All right,
Meeting
Michelle, any
minutes.
second?
Who's second? Oh, okay.
Okay. All right, all in favor? Opposed? Hearing none, unanimous support for accepting of the minutes from the August 22nd meeting. So our next meeting is October 2nd, 6:15, same place, same day of the week. Second? I said second, right? Okay, just want to make sure, because sometimes my brain's saying one thing and my mouth spits out something completely different. All right, so let's get our final attendance in. We'll start with Deborah up in the upper corner.
Thank you, Deborah Hogan, mayoral appointee.
John Brunza, mayoral appointee.
Becca Rathmel, third district, appointed.
Rebecca Porter, first district.
Mary Ann Kell,
Eileen Hughes, District 2.
Michelle O'Loughlin, Council at Large.
Maryland, Austin, sixth district.
Jordan Trice, fifth district.
And I'm Justin McGregor, seventh district and chair. Have a good night. We'll see you all on October 2nd. A motion to adjourn? All in favor?
Motion.
John was
I'll
first,
second.
second. Okay. Favor?
Aye.
Opposed? No? All right, let's go. Bye. We'll see you the second.